The Katha Sarit Sagara means the ocean of stories. The Katha Sarit Sagara refers to a book called as Bruhatkatha. Literally translated, Bruhatkatha means the big story or a big narrative. Bruhatkatha was written by a man called Gunadhya, and the story has been written in the language of Paishachi. The sad part of this is that this work no longer exists, nor do we know all the stories from the work. The reason we know about the Bruhatkatha is because Katha Sarit Sagara and another work in Sanskrit called as Brihat refers to this book. This is the story of how the Bruhatkatha came to be written and why the work is lost. For this, we have to go to the abode of Kailasha, and Kailasa is the abode of Lord Shiva, who is the god of the destruction of all evil. His wife is Parvati, and the two of them are supposed to be the originators of the Bruhatkatha according to the version given in the Katha Sarit Sagara. You will have to tell me a story that you have told no one before. Goddess Parvati looked playful as she studied Shiva, and they were both in Mount Kailash. This was naturally a very difficult task for Shiva because there was almost no story that the goddess would not know. But then Lord Shiva knew the perfect story, and he was about to begin, but then Goddess Parvati asked all the people in Kailash to leave them alone, and she placed Nandi as a guard outside. Now, who is Nandi? Nandi is the guard of Lord Shiva, and he generally guards the house of Shiva and does not let strangers inside. Once that they were alone, Lord Shiva started his story. It was at this time that Pushpadanta, one of the Ganas of Lord Shiva, came to Kailasha. Ganas are all followers or disciples of Shiva. Pushpadanta was more than shocked when Nandi barred him from entering the place. But curiosity got the better of the Gana, and using his powers, he transformed himself and entered into the room where Shiva and Parvati were alone. Pushpadanta was caught in a beautiful astonishment as he heard the wonderful story of the Vidyadharas. That was the story that Shiva had narrated to Parvati. The Vidyadharas were supernatural beings, and they were also attendants of Lord Shiva. After hearing the story, Pushpadanta was bursting with joy. He left the inner room of the Lord and the Goddess, and from there Pushpadanta went to meet his wife Jaya. Jaya could not miss the fact that Pushpadanta looked radiantly happy. The minute Jaya asked him about it, Pushpadanta could not contain himself and told his wife the entire story that the goddess had heard from the Lord. Jaya heard the brilliant story and could feel waves of happiness wash over her. She understood exactly why her husband had been so excited on hearing the story. Unfortunately for Pushpadanta, his troubles had just started. Jaya was one of the friends of Goddess Parvati. The next day, Jaya came to Goddess Parvati. Barely contained excitement, she told the story to Parvati. Jaya did not understand why the goddess was so angry on hearing her story. That evening, Lord Shiva had a very angry wife. The story that you have told me is not even a special one. Everyone knows about it. Jaya told me the same story, the goddess hissed angrily. Lord Shiva looked surprised, and finally, using his powers, he had figured out what must have happened. As the goddess realized what had happened, she angrily had Pushpadanta come before her. Trembling in fear, the Gana appeared before her. The goddess cursed the Gana. Go to earth and live as a mortal. You have no right to be in a place like Kailasha, the goddess told the Gana. Devi, please forgive me. Parvati turned and saw that these words were not from Pushpadanta, because Pushpadanta looked like he was incapable of speaking. The person who had actually spoken was another Gana by name Malyavan. Pushpadanta acted out of curiosity. Malyavan continued, please forgive him. That was as far as Malyavan got. The goddess was so angry that she cursed both the Ganas to go and live on earth as mortals. Devi, please do not be so harsh. Both the Ganas finally begged the goddess. But now that Parvati had cursed the two men, she felt her anger go down a little. She looked at the two men and gave them a solution of coming out of this curse. The goddess said that Pushpadanta was to meet a man by name Ganabhuti and tell him the story of the Vidyadharas. And only after Pushpadanta did that would Pushpadanta's curse be lifted. As far as Malyavan was concerned, the goddess said that when he heard the story from Ganabhuti and Malyavan shall publish the story, then his curse shall be lifted. The minute the goddess finished speaking, the two men vanished from there and appeared as mortals on earth. The story goes on about how Pushpadanta was reborn as Varuchi in the small town of Kaushambi. Remembering all the details of his past life, Pushpadanta went in search of Ganabhuti and finally told him the story of the Vidyadharas. Thus, Pushpadanta was released from his curse. Malyavan was reborn as Gunadhya. Gunadhya was an extraordinarily intelligent man. Gunadhya became the minister of King Satyavahana. But remembering his curse, Gunadhya went to the Bindya forest and there found Ganabhuti. Gunadhya wrote the entire story as told by Ganabhuti. It is believed that Malyavan wrote the story in his own blood and he wrote it in a Paishachi language. Paishachi language, literally translated, means the language of the dead. There could be many reasons about why Gunadhya wrote the Bruhatkatha in the Paishachi language. He had lost a debate with another scholar. One of the conditions of this debate was that Gunadhya could not publish any of his works in any of the known languages of those times. That could be the reason that Gunadhya had written the Bruhatkatha in Paishachi. Now, coming back to Gunadhya, after getting all the stories, the next problem faced by Gunadhya was the publication of the stories. He knew that the best way to get the stories published was to get the king to hear it. Gunadhya took the story to the king. Unfortunately, King Satyavahana could not read the language in which the stories were written, so the king ignored it. Unable to bear the fact that he was not going to be released from his curse, Gunadhya retired to the forest again. He was so depressed that he pulled out the parchments on which he had written the stories and read it out aloud in the forest with a fire before him. After reading the page, Gunadhya would burn the page. The story was so powerful that it was said that even the wild animals were drawn to the fire as Gunadhya read the story out aloud. Around this time, King Satyavahana, as was his habit, came to the forest for hunting. He found all the animals in the forest were missing. Tracking the animals, the king came to the clearing where Gunadhya was reading the story. The king could not make out the words, but the sound of the reading was so charming that it soothed the king. That was when the king saw exactly what Gunadhya was doing. The king hastily stopped Gunadhya from sacrificing the epic. But the king was late. Gunadhya had written a total of 7 chapters and he had already burnt 6 of them. The only remaining one was the 7th chapter. The 7th chapter became the remains of the Bruhatkatha. The Bruhatkatha, as we know it, was written in Prakrit, and the fables of India, the Panchatantra, the Vetala Panchasvati, were all based on the 7th chapter of the Bruhatkatha. It was based on the Bruhatkatha that Katha Sarit Sagara, which is almost a complete collection of Indian legends, fairy tales and folk tales, were told by an author named Somadeva. What the original 6 chapters contain is something that is lost to us now.